Hey, welcome. On today's show, do we really want our LLMs to have total recall like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Today's LLMs have a memory problem. Short context windows, hallucinations, static knowledge, pre-trained data sets. They're all limiting our LLMs to remember past conversations and sometimes even earlier parts of the current conversation you're having in the chat. But really, you need to forget about what you know about memory with LLMs because there are new models coming out. We've got things from Google's Titan, which is amazing, MemoryLLM, Memory Bank, that are all working to solve the problems of like persistent memory. But then that begs the question, right? What do we actually want our LLMs to remember? Do we want total recall? Do we want a continuous memory of everything? Or does that actually cause more problems than it's worth and obviously take more data than it's worth? So which memories are more important? And the idea here is that could you go and look at the human brain as a plan on how LLM should work about memory? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Today is February 20th, 2025. This is the Daily AI Show. And today I am joined by nearly the entire group. We have Jimmy, Beth, Carl, Andy, and I'm Brian. So that's the conversation today, guys. I'm excited about this one. This came off a conversation, which was just yesterday, right? I was talking about memory and saying, like, I think there's a bigger conversation here about memory. Do we really want our LLMs to remember everything? Is that the goal? Or is it more of a hybrid approach of how we remember and how humans remember? And do we want some sort of mimicked process? And that's where I think we can talk about Google's Titan, which is phenomenal, by the way, as far as what they're trying to do. But again, the memory book as well as memory LLM are all approaching it from different angles. But before we even get into that or where we currently are with memory and who has what context window, because we talk about that too, I think maybe the conversation for you guys is like, what do you guys individually want out of a memory? I mean, if we could just snap a finger and tomorrow the LLM of your choice, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, Gemini, had it, what is it? What's that thing for you guys? So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that first.
I wanted to remember the right things
Okay.
and not remember the wrong things, which I realize is, something that I need to actually think about upfront. You all know that one of my favorite uses is to get the AI to interview me so that I can get what I am thinking or envisioning out. And I don't have a thought before that about whether this is a memory conversation or not. So I'm always going back on the back end or forgetting that and then being frustrated when, I get some sort of, content generated for me that obviously is pulling from a memory that isn't impactful on what, that, like, is pulling the wrong weight. It's adding a kind of gravity to the generation now that I don't want. That's not what
Mm,
I was trying to get. And that is a frustrating experience because, I am generally the way that I am interacting with the memory is by being frustrated by it,
mm.
and
Yeah.
that's not a positive for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm definitely mostly positive by memory. With the rest of you guys, what do you think?
I'll say that I want the emergence of a personal assistant that's an agent or me, and a prerequisite for that, and a prerequisite also for artificial general intelligence, something that's akin to the way human memory works with our own processing of intelligence. Um, that requires long-term self-updating memory. And I want, to avoid all the problems that can occur if, I give information to my personal assistant and it doesn't understand that, so it retains that. Okay. It's going to lock that away. Okay. I remember that. But then I give it another instruction that may have some interaction with that old memory that is stored. And I want it to understand the temporal relationship between those two so that the thing that I said more recently does have higher priority or weight when recalling and or organizing for reasoning purposes and taking action for me. Those more recent things, and we do this naturally as a human, right? We kind of have mechanical processes almost in our brain that decay the recall and primacy of older memories and bring the newer memories into sharper focus when we consult our memories. unless we're really old, we're just reminiscing like I sometimes do.
Well, you brought up a good term on this one before we jump to Jimmy and Carl. The term that I learned today, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and it's kind of actually what you said, Andy. And we'll talk about it a little bit more as we talk about some of these forward-thinking models, no pun intended there, on how they're approaching memory and how it's solving for the some of the things you're talking about. But there's something actually called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is a little bit about how we forget. The example I saw was we can remember a phone number to type it. We can look at it, remember it, but then forget it immediately because it doesn't need to go in any sort of long-term memory. Surprises, delights, they tend to stay with us a little bit longer. So it's interesting how all these things sort of mimic or look at how the human brain works. And that gives us insight onto maybe how we want LLMs to work alongside us. But Carl and Jimmy, I'd be curious to hear that first question. Like, what do you guys ultimately want from memory in your LLM if we could snap a finger?
I'll take it from a user perspective. When I'm having a conversation, I want it to remember the entire conversation. I don't want to have to at any point, if I've been talking to it for 10 minutes, I don't want to have to go back and say, "Oh, did you remember the whole initial question?" I know we're talking about this section right now, but keep it in context for what the larger conversation is. And I think Andy touched upon that a little bit, but essentially from that, that would be a great user experience step forward, quality of life, and how I would interact with the AI or with an LLM is if you just remember everything that we've already talked about, and then we can reference it and go back to it and things like that. The less prompting I have to do because it is remembering more of it, that is, I think, a huge boon for me, at least on the way I interact with LLMs now.
What about you, Carl?
Have you tried ChatGPT? Because I know they updated it. If you go to 4.0, it actually remember like if you ask it, "Hey, what did we talk about our last 10 conversations?" It actually remembers it, it- just if you try it. So that's part of, to me, that was part of the update. I think I don't know if that was the recent update but give it a shot. And I think like that's the whole purpose of the whole autonomous agents part when I'm thinking about it, because I don't want to have to keep telling it, "Hey, I need you to do this." Even just doing, go log into this, do this, create this. It'd be much easier than to be like, "Hey, remember what you did yesterday? Okay, do that, but also add this, and then add this, and then do this." And then it just remembers the mistakes it made the previous time. And it's sort of like maybe that's the precursor to it learning by itself. So it's, oh, remembers that, takes action based on that, and then keeps going over and over. So that's sort of what I was thinking. I was like, oh, what are you going to do with that memory now? And it isn't just us recalling what we talked about. It's you going, taking action based on that. So simple example, if I go to operator and I type, I want it to do this, with memory, be like, hey, do what we do that from the last time, but now do this. And it's not, there's a difference between, hey, execute this task that we named, but rather it actually remembers the process and then with reasoning builds upon that. That's sort of how I was thinking about it.
I think it's a good call out too, because we don't have perfect memories. I don't know the science of it. I didn't dive deep into this. I wish I'd used deep research for Perplexity and gone into how memory works for humans. But as a general standpoint, we remember context around it, but our brain isn't a perfect recall system of, well, most people don't have that. Some people have those abilities. But most people don't have that. We remember the context around it, how somebody maybe their tone or inflection, but I may remember that Jimmy was mad at me, but I may not remember. And somebody said, well, what was Jimmy mad about? And I'd say, well, look, it was this or that. And I'm like, he got really angry at this one point or whatever. And if somebody really pushed me and said, yes, but what did Jimmy say to you? I'd be like, I don't remember exactly the words. I remember how it made me feel. Or that's what stuck was that, ooh, I've really upset Jimmy. And that has caused this more of a deeper neural connection in the brain. So as I was researching this and looking at where we are with LLMs right now, I think it's a really good problem to explore because here are some of the things we're up against. The way current LLMs work, they're pre-trained on data. We know this. Now they now have access to the internet, what gives the feeling of having like updated memory, but it's just doing search and retrieval. And sometimes it's wrong because it will, like, for instance, I had Perplexity and it was wrong earlier today when it told me how updated 4.0 is with its training data. They gave me a 2023 date and I knew that was wrong. Perplexity went out, searched, found what it felt was a reputable source and came back with that information. It was imperfect, right? So it was a hallucination. Tried to do the right thing, pulled the wrong citation, whatever. So then we have short or sometimes we have longer with Gemini context windows. That helps them a little bit because now you can say, like, well, if I have 1 million or 2 million tokens and I'm talking in a long chat, it should do a better job of remembering much, much earlier in that conversation without me having to bring it back into the conversation. And I was actually just training on this yesterday to two different teams, two different sales teams. And I was talking about that, how like one workaround of that is when you start to feel like it's wobbling a little bit in a chat, you basically ask it to summarize what you've talked about so far, which then brings it into the more recent part of the chat, which almost like resets a memory. It's a little bit of a hack to keep you going is you can get a summary or hit the highlights of your conversation so far to in order to stop it from forgetting essentially, right? And so you could do that. That's like a little bit of a hack. And we have RAG systems. RAG systems are like having an open book. What are the facts? I'll go look over here if you want me to, and I'll bring it back. We could theoretically set up a massive RAG system of all our memories and put it in there and be like, these are all facts. But I think that's where it gets interesting. And that's where you're seeing things like Titan and other ones approach this from like a three-pronged system or three-pronged approach to it, which isn't to say that we want total recall, as I said in the opening, that actually isn't probably what we want. It's a little bit of what I think all of you guys have said. Andy, you were talking about it as well. And we look at Titan, one of the things that Titan is doing is it's looking at it from three different areas. Now, Titan was just announced. I didn't think they mentioned it last year, but there's only been the archive papers only from December 31st of last year. So less than 2 months old. And so you can go and archive. It's called Titans Learning to Memorize at Test Time. But basic summary of what that is they approached it from persistent memory and how that stores core facts, contextual memory, which retains recent interactions temporarily, the phone number, the quick facts about what we talked about on the show that I'm soon going to forget. How many times have we all said, we know we had a show on that, but what we said about it, we're at show 403 today, 404 today. There you go. I've already forgotten that. And so if you ask me what we talked about show 200, I might remember the topic at this point, but certainly not what Beth or Carl or Andy might have said, or even who was here that day. And then the third part is surprise-driven retention, which I was talking about earlier with like Jimmy. If Jimmy yells at me or something startles me, that hits my brain a different way. So when we talk about like Andy, what you talked about, which is like having this assistant, or if we go to agents, having a full memory is really not going to be the solution because number one, it's super resource intensive. It's super data intensive. And there's a good chance that it would fail like a RAG system might fail, where it doesn't know just because it has the data, it's not capable of doing what you were saying, Carl, to pull the right data back, the context of what's important. So what I think is interesting about what I see these models doing, these papers talking about, is they're like, no, no, no. It's going to pull in some of the long term. It's going to pull in some of the short term. And when it comes to MemoryLLM, what they're actually doing is they set aside 1 million tokens of, or 1 billion tokens, excuse me, of a 7 or 8 billion token model that plays as the memory. And it actually gets rewritten in those tokens and then appends that or concatenates that to the conversations, sort of like what we see today, the way ChatGPT is supposed to work with memory. But I'm with you, Beth. I turned it off a long time ago. And I don't even really train people on it because I feel it fails more than it succeeds from the memory side.
Okay, so here's a test, and I'm actually writing something about this. So one of the things I thought, you know, uh, I saw McKay Wrigley do this, and I was like, and it's for deep research. So what he did, he knows nothing about paid media ads, paid search ads, right? Google ads. So what he was doing is he would download the reports, any reports, campaign group bad reports, search term reports, ad performance reports, time-based reports, whatever the report was from Google AdWords, and just upload it into deep research and be like, okay, this is how my ads are performing. This is, here's the context. This is what I'm trying to do. Uh, give me what should I do? Right. And then you go off and do it. If you don't know how to do it, you can ask whatever. You can ask AI to do it. How can I do this? And I like using paid search because it's pretty straightforward. There's a creative involved, but most of the time it's, search terms, right? So it's a little bit more structured data. What From a memory standpoint, instead of every other day, every quarter, every week, biweekly, whatever, you upload these reports, that memory aspect would be, oh, I remember the last 3 times we did this, and this was the result, and this is what's happening.
Right.
And I remember it's June, and in June, this is in this type of campaign for the last 3 years, we've had this up or down or wherever we are, we'll make that adjustment. That's what, to me, a useful case of memory would be, right? But anybody listening to this, I really, really, if you run paid search, I wanna see the output. If you use deep research, use any Grok, um, Perplexity, whatever you use. I would love to see how good deep research is because I think that's an underreported use case, right? It can search, but the model is actually really good at data analysis too. That's why in any of the blogs or whatnot it says, hey, you should have it look at financial data. It's recommending it. So I'm like, this is amazing. So why not put that and try it out? But that's sort of like from a memory standpoint, more of a business use case. That's what I would expect memory to hopefully eventually be.
Yeah. I think that's a good point because like it's not just data retrieval. It's actually what I talked about a week ago or something, which is the prescriptive side of the analytics, not just the predictive. It's the higher order of the prescriptive. Saying to your point, Carl, if an LLM comes back and says, this is the data, these are the raw numbers of how the ads reported. But here's what I also know. You had an input that corrected for this because it was Labor Day. You also said that this was going on. I've adjusted for those differences and those variances. And this is what the prescriptive movement should be. This is what I'm saying you should do next, not just based on the data, but based on the totality of the conversation of the context of what was going on. And to your point, historical data. By the way, last February 20th, you didn't have as many people come in your door at such and such a restaurant, but it was also pouring. That's the reason why February 20th wasn't so good. It wasn't because it was 3 days after President's Day in the States. It was because it was pouring and it was horrible weather and nobody was going in stores that day.
That becomes scary good because that now it's like I've not just taken your context, I've done my own research
Yes.
based on our private conversation or whatever conversation, and also augmented it with reasoning to come up with, hey, this is what happened, and here's all the reasons why. And it's like that is amazing. That's how I'm thinking. Like, and this is where I think Jan LeCun is right. For now, it's like I don't. There's all these things are just in piecemeal, and they're kind of trying to connect it, but it's not like talking to you, to any of us, and say, hey, what happened? What this problem that happened, what happened? And then we come up with an explanation that doesn't just take the immediate, but it takes a environmental, historical, all the stuff around it and provides a coherent response to that problem. I think that's where I think it's when we talk about AGI, I'm not sure if that's the definition of that. To me, maybe I'm kind of forming that myself. It's like, if you can solve a problem, but take all these things surrounding it and provide a rational explanation, but not just by data, but also by logical conclusions and understanding cues and so on. To me, that's more related than where we are right now.
So what I think is interesting in what you're saying is that that sounds more like a project or a perplexity space or I don't know what everybody else calls it. I think most of the systems call projects, so that you are um, get grouping the chats that happen in the umbrella of, that thing, and you are also uploading sources, and in Perplexity, you're giving links to sources that you want it to take into context in these conversations, and that is a kind of fine-tuning memory kind of thing, but it's not related to what we know of as memory, which is, "Hey, you've chatted with us about all these different things, so we're just gonna remember the last 10." And the other piece that I would say in this, like, for us specifically, I may do like, the last 10 chats may all be about the subject of today's show. When I go tomorrow or tonight, I want you to know that we did the show, right? Like, I'm good. We're not talking about memory anymore. I want you to understand this next thing. And it's not just podcasters who do shows every day, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about clients that you've done, you've onboarded them,
Yeah.
right? Consulting work. There's so many situations in which, like, this is a container for this conversation. Yay. Remember it. Like, put a bow on it, give it a keyword, whatever, but understand because of the other things that you know about me, and I've now asked 3 things about this new topic. This is where we are now, right? I want you to understand that because of everything else that you understand about me.
And what I've heard about too is what I feel like is coming is the models are getting so fast that as you were typing, we sort of saw this with Meta a while ago, that as you started typing, pictures would show up mid-sentence. We're getting quickly past the point of it takes the whole prompt for the LLM to start reacting. The same as I'll use Andy as an example. If I if Andy and I are in a room and we're having a conversation, and Andy interrupts my sentence to respond to me. In fact, this is something my 14-year-old daughter does to me all the time, and I'm always saying as a dad, "Would you let me finish what I was gonna say? Because you probably wouldn't have that question." Right? So, like, just a dad thing, right? But if Andy and I are having a conversation, he's already processing halfway through my sentence where he thinks I'm going. And he's anticipating, most likely, how he's gonna respond to that. Maybe he's just waiting to say his piece. Maybe I triggered something and he wants to respond to it. And he might cut me off and say, "No, that's not what I meant, Brian. I meant this," in order to do the conversation. I believe, and what I've read is prompts are going the same way. And here's what I think that means based on what you guys are saying, is that uh, we're gonna use Thumper as a prop here, and the in a remote. And so I start typing my prompt, and if future memory starts working the way we would want it to work in a prompt, then during that prompt, to your point, Beth, let's use your example of past shows, words, whatever. As you start typing, the LLM starts gathering stuff and it puts it over here mid sentence while you're still putting out your prompt, and it's going, okay, I think she's gonna, nope, it's not gonna be the remote, it's gonna be the mouse and Thumper, it's gonna be one of these, it's definitely Thumper. And then you hit enter and it's already pulled in contextual memory about Thumper into that conversation at the point that you're hitting enter. It's gonna be moving faster in preloading, just like Google web pages do. Cache, or having cache on your computer, or cookies enable frequently visited websites to load faster because they're sitting in memory on your computer. We're all used to that. We all know that. That's how some websites load much, much faster than others that you've never been to. Prompting is going to go the same way. It's going to be preloading stuff lightning fast without our knowledge of that in the background. And I think that's how I see more memory actually being helpful to us, to that example, Beth, which is, hey, when I start talking about a new topic and tonight's show, or you and I both do editing on the back end for the show and stuff like that, already understand that this is what I mean. Ignore yesterday's topic, but do bring in the steps that were used to help me make this process faster. And that's very tricky. Even we struggle with that as humans, right? So to expect AI to be able to know instantly what memory to go grab, what's important, what's not, and it's going to be this weird mix, which is again what I think Titan is really trying to solve for, is a variety of types of memories, not just static memory, not just it's a RAG system and I'll get it all for you, Beth. It's more like, well, I'm going to give more importance to the stuff we talked about recently, but there's also historical long-term memory that might be really important for how we shape all this, back to Carl's example. And then there's some other memory in between that I might pull in for context into it.
Right, and that goes back to what Carl was talking about and Jan LeCun talking about, right? Like, this specific thing seems really difficult for an AI that seems to create patterns based on, or not seems to, it does, it creates patterns like a 1-degree pattern, except of course it's multidimensional. But um but like your cat can understand that it's the next day, right? Like you like these worldviews that allow for repetition, but different, right? It's the same but different in a way that LLMs, as large language models, right, as just focusing on the patterns in the language, is not finding it easy to grasp that idea. And I think that is part of what, I mean, Jan doesn't talk about that in this context, but I do think it's the same. I think that idea of moving through space and time is something that influences this, like, it helps you make a correct inference on what is happening to us who are living through space and time, right? Time is moving, and then we move through space. And I don't think that LLMs really can get that because they don't.
No,
I'd like to talk about where the memory that we would like the AI in the cloud or AI on our desktop or in our device, where we want the memory to reside. And if you're interacting with one of the major frontier models and they have a memory feature, as most of them do, um, some of them are exposed for your control, and you can manage what's recalled and included in context when you interact with that model. Um, or there are retrieval augmented generations, external databases that are used to retain chat history. And Gareth, to your question, like, how do LLMs store the memory? They don't. The LLM itself, the large language model, that deep neural network doesn't ever change. Even when it does a web search, it doesn't retrain itself to understand the new context that it collected from recent web information. That has to be generated by the search module of that system architecture and then delivered to the LLM for application of the trained skills that the LLM has, which include now reasoning. So it can put all the pieces that you deliver to it together in a sensible way and deliver a response. Now, there are more advanced methods that are being developed for the external databases that will be the counterpart memory to the LLM's reasoning central processing. So one of them is a company that I stumbled upon yesterday on Product Hunt, and it's a company called Zep. And they've built an open source temporal knowledge graph. Now, a knowledge graph, just to take a quick aside, a knowledge graph creates structure in the memory. It doesn't just embed and vectorize the information that you added to the knowledge base. It actually has a taxonomic or ontological structure. This is how all the different concepts that are represented in all the information in it are related to each other. And a graph has nodes. Here's this concept, which is X. And there's another concept over here, Y. And the edge of X to Y is understood by a knowledge graph. in a way that a regular, vector database doesn't have. It doesn't have a schema that organizes that information inside it. So now this company, Zep, has built what they call it's an open source project, Graffiti, a temporal knowledge graph framework that allows AI agents to learn and retain information over time, just like humans do. And what does that mean? Well, um, it's a system that is the foundation of fast and accurate long-term memory that's structured, that has understanding about what the meaning or priority is of the things that have been collected. And most importantly, what's new about this company is it's temporal, meaning it has a timestamp on each of those things that are added to the knowledge graph so that when you ask it to do something, it knows how to structure those and can answer a question like, what was the sequence of things that happened, when we were talking? Did we talk about this thing first and then the next thing next? A regular retrieval augmented generation system will not have that information for you. But this knowledge graph with temporal structure, that's key. And it's the first time I've seen it. There may be others out there, but this literally just surfaced on Product Hunt yesterday and got a lot of attention there, I think.
Can you spell the name of the company? We have questions and it looks like it's Get Zep. Sorry, Beth did it for you.
It's ZEP. I'm in Canada, so I have to say Zed. Uh, so it's ZEP, and their product is called Graffiti. That's the temporal knowledge graph.
Graffiti.
By the way,
Zed.
spelled with graph, GRAPHITI.
Oh, before I gotta go early today, I just want to say, hey, we're keeping Andy for one day because the Four Nations Face Off is today, and yeah, so go Canada on that one.
They want to clean up here. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. You gotta be careful with that one. Um, I think that's awesome. That seems in line with some of the stuff I found, such as Tim, which is Think in Memory, and like I said, two of the other ones. So let me just talk really briefly about what these other two are doing because it sounds sort of in line with what you're talking about. Although these are more or less papers. So there's a paper that came out, I think February, and this is Memory LLM. And the paper is called Memory LLM Towards Self-Updatable Large Language Models. And this is sort of a little bit of the abstract without reading the whole thing. Existing large language models usually remain static after deployment, which might make it hard to inject new knowledge into the model. You were just talking about that, Andy. We aim to build models containing considerable portion of self-updatable parameters, enabling a model to integrate new knowledge effectively and efficiently. To this end, we introduced Memory LLM, a model that comprises a transformer and a fixed size memory pool with the latent space of the transformer. Within the latent space of the transformer. Memory LLM can self-update with text knowledge and memorize the knowledge injected earlier. Then it goes on to say our evaluations demonstrate the ability of Memory LLM to effectively incorporate new knowledge as evidenced by its performance on model editing benchmarks. And then it goes on and has a little bit more in there. So they said they've run this over 1 million times with 1 million updates, and they have seen no performance degradation over that time, which is actually really, really impressive. That reminds me of like rewriting old floppy disks, and stuff like that. Over time, they degrade. Yeah, they're not able to continuously, or VHS tape back in the day. They're going to degrade if you try to re-record on them 40 times. So that's what I was thinking when I heard this, like, oh, they're running this millions of times and they're not seeing any degradation in the quality of that updated memory. And this is the one where I mentioned where it's like a piece of the larger total 7 billion parameters, like 1 billion of it is being held aside. Now that's a little bit different than memory bank, all one word with a capital B in there, enhancing large language models with long-term memory. This paper came out beginning of January. So everything I've been mentioning is all fairly new. And then it goes on to say, this one's a little bit longer, but we'll just try to get the top parts of it here. Large language models have drastically reshaped our interactions with artificial intelligence systems, showcasing impressive performance across an extensive array of tasks. Despite this, a notable hindrance remains. the deficiency of a long-term memory mechanism within these models. This shortfall becomes increasingly evident in situations demanding sustained interactions, such as personal companion systems, which they focus on more. I should just point that out. Psychological counseling, secretarial assistance, recognizing the necessity for long-term memory, we propose Memory Bank, a novel memory mechanism tailored for LLMs. And then this last part here, Memory Bank enables the models to summon relevant memories, continually evolve through a continuous memory updates, comprehend and adapt to the user's personality over time by synthesizing information from previous interactions to mimic anthropomorph- anthropomorphic, yes,
Answer.
anthropomorphic,
Yeah.
anthropomorphic behaviors and selectively preserve memory, so on and so forth. They're the ones that talk about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve theory, which they actually line up with. So here's just a few. The ZEP that you talked about, obviously Titan is a big one. And that's nothing to take away from Gemini in the last 6 days. Had a big thing where they said, now if you're a premium user, which by the way I am because I signed up for it through Google One for a previous show, and I don't have it. So it's supposed to. What's supposed to happen is I'm able to say, just like Carl was saying earlier, I should be able to ask in one chat what I talked about in the last week. That's supposed to be able to be a thing I have right now with Gemini because I have a premium model. And it apparently has not rolled out to me because Gemini has no idea what we talked about in the previous chat. I also checked just to see because maybe Carl, because of his pro model, 4.0 has no idea what I talked about. I didn't think it did, but it also has no idea, at least for me, on anything we've talked about in previous chats. So that's the next step. But obviously, we can see that it's going much farther than what what these models are coming out with now. Helpful, better than probably the memory we have. Google or Gemini had a thing where you could save thoughts, kind of just like memories with ChatGPT. But now seems like it's going to become more automated. But I think really what this comes back to is the ultimate question here today is like, but what do we really want it to do? Because when it comes to memory, forgetting is actually just as vital. Choosing what to forget is really, really important. I gave an example of the people you'll see in the news from time to time that have uh, um, a near perfect memory, and they can recall dates of anything they did. They can tell you what was going on the TV at the time, so on and so forth. But most of the interviews I've seen with people say that's as much of a hindrance as it is a superpower because they don't want to remember everything all the time. They don't have the ability to turn that off in their brain. And so it can become super distracting and a bit of a problem, as you would imagine. So I think that's really what I think about is as we move into a system where my future child being born would have this AI tutor from the time of pre-kindergarten. In Florida, they call that VPK. From VPK all the way up through college and beyond, that is there to assist her to the best of its ability with her whatever. If she had dyslexia, if she learned visually better than she read by reading, or she needed analogies or whatever, and it learned over time. How do we build that memory system? Because I don't think it's just one big rag. I don't think that's how this works. So we're gonna need new innovations like you guys have been talking about to get there, I think.
So I just did the experiment because Brian mentioned having access to Google Advanced, to Gemini Advanced, and it it gave me past conversations, right? So it said, "To summarize our previous conversations, I'm an AI assistant powered by Gemini, a large language model from Google AI that can process information and complete tasks. I'm always learning and growing, excited to help you, whenever you need. In our most recent conversations, we discussed my capabilities and types of information I can access. Also shared that I'm running on Gemini Pro 1.0 model. Would you like to discuss any of these topics further?" And then it gives me the previous chat that it's basing this on, but it's not the most recent previous chats. It's
Yeah. So where is it
and
pulling it from?
like,
Yeah.
we did, like, certainly, I have had those conversations, and I started to wonder, are you pulling from my, like, AI Studio chats also? Because I'm not sure where you're getting all this. So I would say still needs work. Like, it does actually function apparently, but I would not say that this is a great memory. Like, if you're telling me, "Yes, I totally remember. I remember these things," and you're saying something I don't remember talking to you about, that's not helpful for me.
Right. And hallucinations of your past chats are just as damaging as hallucinations from the trained model. You could imagine, right? Like if it's saying with confidence that we definitely talked about this and the answer was definitely X, not Y. And it says it with assurance. And I go, well, I remember having that conversation. I thought it was the other one, but it's probably right. It's pulling it and it's hallucinating with confidence. What does that get us if people start leaning on these memories a little bit harder and trusting them, and then finding that those memories from past chats, even at this level, where we are right now with the models, have hallucinations in them? How damaging does that become?
And I have to say that that's my experience of Gemini. I wonder if, Andy or Jimmy have, similar thoughts because I still experience Gemini as having more hallucinations with absolute confidence than the other models. Like, what there was a song called "Frequently Wrong but Never in Doubt." That's my experience of Gemini, right? Like, a and I would just rather, right? Like, and I realize hallucinations, it's only called a hallucination when it's wrong, right? Otherwise, it's just called AI generation
Right.
because it's doing the same function,
Still predicting. Yeah.
right? But yeah, I feel I experience that in Gemini way more than I experience that in the other flavors.
Like that frequently long, but never in doubt. Yeah. That to me, I agree. That's almost more damaging. And so what I would say here is like, there's a long way to go for memory to be, I think, the memory that we sort of think in our minds collectively, we, not just us four. And Carlos said earlier, all the folks in the chat, by the way, super props to Gareth and Gwen and Jeff and Jude and Greg and everybody else in there who's been adding to the conversation and giving your guys' thoughts on how you're using memory or how it is different for custom GPT versus regular. There's just a ton of great information. Just props to anybody. If you want to get the most out of this show, come do the show live if you can and get in the chat because you get all of what we're doing, plus so much expertise in the chat as well. So I appreciate that. But I just think we have, to wrap up here, like I think we just have, for it to really be useful, not just like mildly useful. I think we're really in the early days of memory. Like I said, I turned off memories in ChatGPT a while ago. It would take a lot for me to turn it back on, frankly. It doesn't understand context. It just understands if I said I like chocolate ice cream, it's like, that sounds like something important. I'm like, not at all. It's never going to come up again, like whatever. And also, I'm a consultant, so I work with multiple different clients, and you can imagine that that's not great because it confuses things all the time in there. So I would say out of the three, I'm the most excited about Titan. When you read through that paper, by the way, there's multiple different blogs on it, but if you wanted to go to archive, you could get to it again. Titans learning to memorize at test time. And they explain what test time means, by the way, and everything else in there. But how they break it down, there's also a Medium article that I recommend called Google Titans Model Explain: The Future of Memory Driven AI Architectures. And that one came out on January 26th, 2025. That's on Medium, but I was able to read the whole thing without a subscription or anything. That gentleman does a good job of breaking down what it does, how it works, or how it's intended to work. And so there's hope, but I just think that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. I just think we're not as close as maybe we hope we would like to be with memory, and having a true LLM that could sit beside you and be really helpful across time. Because I think if we deployed what we had today, what we would get is something that was just trying to remember data as opposed to what Carl said, which is remembering data in context of how that data was presented. And that's really what I think we ultimately want with memory. What do you guys think? Anything left?
I'll say that, that's great. a big mind in the world of AI, Ilya Sutskever, the co-founder of OpenAI and their chief scientist, now at his own company. He has talked about AGI, and he leads with two technical requirements that are necessary in the approach to AGI. And the first one he lists is dynamic consolidation of memory. So we have outboard memory, we know how to build databases, but having those evolve over time without losing anything that's important and knowing how to restructure this memory, that's essential to operating like a generally intelligent human. The second thing that he talks about is self-play, so that multiple agents can work with the other AI and not have to depend on humans to interact with them in order to make advances. That's self-play, and AI to AI interaction is important to the accelerated advancement of that. Those are the two technical requirements. Then he talks about some other softer issues that are important and essential, truly, and that's alignment. And I forget what the other one was, but there's four things that he says have to be addressed before we get to AGI. Memory is the first one.
Yeah, love it. And I think it's a good place to end this conversation. By the way, tomorrow, Friday, we're going to have our 2-week recap show. So we might have more to say on this topic, as well as topics that have come up over the last 2 weeks. The news cycle is picking up. We can definitely feel that. There's been a lot of buzz and different things. Obviously, the Grok announcement came out, as well as updates from ChatGPT and perhaps Anthropic 4. I don't know. There's a lot out there. So we'll tomorrow for our 2-week recap. I always say it's one of my favorite shows because it gives us an opportunity not to introduce necessarily a new topic, but actually just to pause and go back and have an open conversation about all the other topics over the last 2 weeks of shows. So make sure you come back tomorrow and hang out with us. Don't forget, you can go to thedailyishow.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter directly from there. That newsletter goes out every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern. So always really proud of that. I think you guys will really enjoy it. If you just like a really nice sort of, not short, it's a long read, it's a deep dive. But if you just like to sit down on a Sunday morning, have that cup of coffee and just kind of dive into everything that's been going on over the last week, I think that newsletter serves that purpose really, really well and complements the show in ways that go beyond what we can talk about live. So that's it. Thanks for the conversation today about memory. We'll see how much of this we remember for tomorrow's show. We will see you then. Thanks for everybody in the comments as always. Please like and subscribe if you liked today's show. It means a lot to us and it helps us grow as well. Till then.
Aloha.